Hi, this is Dr. Loren M. Hill, and you're listening to the Academic Career Coaching Podcast. Today, I'm here with Dr. Patricia Arredondo. I'm so grateful that she has agreed to meet with us today and have a chat. I've known Patricia for a number of years. I consider her a mentor, a great friend, someone who I can go to in a pinch, and someone I can go to even when I just need to chat. So, Patricia, welcome, and tell me about yourself and what you're doing these days.
Well, good afternoon, or should I say buenas tardes, Dr. Hill. I'm beaming in from Mexico City, and I have had the opportunity, thanks to COVID, to be wherever I want to be to work. So I am primarily in Mexico City, engaged in my virtual consulting work. However, I didn't get here accidentally, as any of us, and there's so much happenstance, but you also have to plan for where you end up. And I'd like to say that I really appreciate Dr. Hill inviting me to have this conversation today. As she said, we've known each other for a few years, and there's a kind of sisterhood when you have shared interests and shared goals, and you can lend support to one another informally, as she said, just for a chat, or maybe a little more formally. And that's I think the beauty of having worked in higher education for a number of years and now in the consulting space. I always think of myself as an educator. And I believe that education is what helped me to unlock myself to what I do today. That it was, my own higher education trajectory, but then staying in higher education as a faculty member for a number of years, and then an administrator. When I reflect on my career, because it's about 40 years now since I completed my doctoral program, is that there are a number of milestones that were part of my career development, and those milestones really do begin with my K-12 experience. I'd be remiss to not include that, because that K-12 experience is what set me up to think about education as a career. Not psychology. I'm a psychologist, but I didn't think about psychology. I thought about education, about being a teacher, and about being a counselor. And that K through 12 experience also provided me some role models that I continue to recall as being instrumental to my decision-making process. For example, I had a wonderful high school counselor, really a wonderful high school woman counselor who I just admired, amazing. She's just, when you mentioned something about how I dressed and how I showed up, this woman was like the epitome of a professional woman. And not that I had a math teacher who was also similar, but I worked with this high school counselor, and she was the one who assisted me in applying to college and so forth. And so the decision-making was about going for a master's degree. And I thought about her. I thought about her modeling as a school counselor, and rather than going into Spanish literature, which was the other option, I went into school counseling. So as I look back on my career, there are these individuals who modeled and helped me decide things. Also in that K-12 experience, I have to think of my my family, my nuclear family, and going into counseling and psychology was very much, I think, influenced, and at the time I didn't realize it, about, you know, how I saw my family operate, which was a very close family, and the strength of family and the strength of a Mexican American family. And I pull that into the work I do, because I know it occurs, it's possible. People, Mexican American families like mine were very strengths-based, you know, very interdependent, very helpful to one another. And I also have to mention that my I think achievement orientation really again comes from seeing my grandmother, who pushed ahead after she became a widow. And then my parents, who were, again, very achievement oriented on our behalf. You know, they never went to college, but for them, education for all of us, there were 7 of us, was key. So this whole education theme it was in my life early, and influenced by different sources, different individuals. So moving into kind of the professorate, I'll just jump forward to that. After my doctoral degree, was something that was almost a natural. I always saw myself in that role of a professor. It was something that, as an undergraduate, I had a couple professors who were very, you know, senior and sort of very charismatic, and I thought, hey, you know, that's a cool role, even though they were men. But it was something about the way they engaged us as students. And I had the good fortune at Boston University, which is where I went for my doctoral degree in counseling psychology, to have a professor who encouraged all of us who were part of his cohort to move into the professorate. And that was a trajectory. We weren't going to be practitioners, albeit, you know, I became licensed as a psychologist, but he wanted all of us to be professors. And that fit for me. And so as I look at my career over the years, I've had a 2-track career, you know, one as an academic and one as a consultant, and they're almost equal in numbers of years. It's sort of ironic how my career path went this way, but even as a consultant, I'm always educating. I'm always in an educator role. When I consult about how to plan a diversity strategy in a university or in a nonprofit, I'm providing an educational approach. I'm using an educational approach to guide the process. You know, this is what should come first, second, third in your strategy planning. I find that I've always enjoyed administration, and a lot of people think that's, you know, poisonous, and you know that, you know, why would somebody want to be an administrator in higher education? There's something about being able to be strategic, to plan, to bring other people into that planning process, and then to implement, that has always excited me. And I have found myself as in the academy, you know, starting programs that then persisted over time, because there was a gap to be filled. As a junior professor, I started a bilingual bicultural counselor training program that was federally funded at Boston University. It went on long after I left. When I was at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, this is one of my favorites, is I realized that the School of Continuing Education, where I served as a dean, had no programs for women. And I thought, there's something wrong with this picture. So we started we eventually became a women's leadership certificate, Dr. Hill, but we started with the Women's Leadership Conference, and it has now gone 10 years and is continuing because it's meeting a need. And it is also empowering women who participate. So I would say I see education as a vehicle to empower, as a means to think outside of the box, to see possibilities, So as an educator, as an administrator, and as Dr. Hill mentioned, we met when I was the president of the Chicago School of Professional Psychology in Chicago. I have also found myself in a position like that, or as a associate provost at another institution, a senior, as the only Latina, the first and only Latina to be in those roles. And when I think about my trajectory, I know that I stepped into a number of these positions because I had the capabilities, of serving, but also I became aware as you scan the landscape and you say, well, gosh, there's like 2 women and there's certainly no women of color. And okay, I guess I'll do this, because I usually got selected to do it or was invited in. So I think that's another, I guess, self-observation that I make is that when I've stepped into these leadership roles, it's not been for me so much as to demonstrate that we are capable of doing this. As women of color, we're capable of being in these senior leadership roles. And so, I will continue to do that.
Yes. So this is really fascinating. And, we've known each other quite some time now. And one of the things that Dr. Arredondo knows about me is that I'm really never at a loss for words. But listening to her sort of recount what led her to where we are now has been very interesting. There's some of the things that she's mentioned I had no idea about. And as she alluded to earlier, we were having a prior conversation and I was talking about when I first met her, and she was the president of the institution, and she walked in the door impeccably dressed, but yet didn't sort of, as my grandmother would say, put on airs. She was very approachable, and I was bowled over when I found out that HR had matched me with her so that she could be my institutional mentor. So to hear her say that she early on saw a woman who, was stylish and really made an impact on her. Now I wanted her to know that the same thing happened with us. And so, Dr. Arredondo, in your story, you've talked about people who have made an impression on you, folks that you have made an impression on, and how you've had these sort of parallel careers. And in those parallel careers, I think that you and I talked before about sort of this, I called it a crooked path, but you then later reminded me that it was nonlinear. And so on your nonlinear paths and meeting these people and stepping into these various roles, and oftentimes, as you mentioned, being not only the only woman, but the only woman of color, I wonder if you could speak a bit about the nonlinear path and how being a woman of color as a consultant and an academician have really helped to sustain you? Because I know you mentored me in the aspects of, okay, you're a licensed psychologist, you're also an academician, and there is a space there that can support you. So can you talk to us about that, that path that is not so straight?
That's a great contextual commentary to invite me to speak. And I would say my nonlinear pathway started because I was told at Boston University that I was not tenurable. And I found that pretty, it took me back, because when you step into a tenure track role and your whole goal is to become tenured and move through the ranks, I was how productive I was. I had a grant, I had published published refereed articles, and was out in the world doing things. And it was a really important decision point for me because I could stay there on a one year-to-year contract, but that to me was just not the way I wanted to treat myself. And this is ironic because this is an academic career coaching podcast, is I went for career coaching. And I had to get some other people's insights about, what else is possible. Okay. So that became the opportunity for me to think about how to leverage my skills as an academic, my skills as a psychologist, and my interest in people and organizations, because I've always been interested in organizations. I took the opportunity then to do some research, some self-centered research, and I decided I was going to begin to do some consulting, and did some initial contacts with hospitals and places like that where maybe my background might be, somewhat. I'm sorry about the noise in the background. Can you hear it?
Yes.
Yes. It's the loudspeaker who I think has decided to sit under my balcony. She's going away now. Thank you. Apologies.
Well,
some of the cultural excitement of Mexico City. Okay.
Yes,
That's
yes.
what it is,
I thought, well, that's something going on. It sounds very
that's
festive.
Right. Yeah. She's trying to buy your old refrigerator or your old mattresses, and then they come and take them away. So that happens every day, about 3 times a day.
Well, let me just say that what I love about this is that it is part of the cultural experience, right?
Yeah.
And so as women of color, we know these things go on in our communities, and it's okay, right? It is okay. So please continue.
Okay, well, thank you. I think what I learned from that first breaking away from higher education was that there's a whole world out there. Okay, there's a whole world, and the more I stepped into that other world of industry, if you would, the more interesting it became. And I engaged in women's networks in greater Boston that otherwise I would have not bothered with because I was at the university. I also found myself in different types of networks, Latino professional networks, that I would not have engaged in because of my professional associations. So this whole big world opened up, and I thought about this. We as psychologists are trained with helping skills, right? And so what I was going to do was not help in an organization, was collaborate. So, and then there were interests I had, which were in, working with women, working with immigrants. That had been a long-standing interest. And so I just found places where those interests also aligned. And I did all the, I guess I prepared myself in the way that one does when you're going to start a business. Because it was not just about hanging out a shingle, it was knowing that there were a number of practices I had to put in place.
And this is not something that you learned in your graduate program, certainly wasn't anything that you learned from your fellow academicians, because when we're in the academy, that's what we do, right?
Mm-hmm.
We are
Mm-hmm.
there from, sometimes sun up to sundown. The institution's needs are what are first and foremost. And so I appreciate that you said you had a moment of, reflection about they weren't going to give you tenure, which is, the people listening to the podcast couldn't see my face, but my face dropped because I couldn't believe but I do know that happened and sometimes still does. And so to be able to sort of regroup and assess and say, well, they're not going to value me. I am valuable. So what can I do next? So the next thing you did was get some coaching. And how many of our colleagues or people we know wouldn't do that? They would stay and really try to prove to the institution that, oh yes, please like me, I can do it. I'll raise my hand because I did that a bit before, you stepped in and said, snap out of it. You don't have to take this. It's a big world out there. And I was like, yeah, I thought I knew that before, but I don't know if it's some kind of magic dust that the academy puts in your eyes and then you suddenly forget. Yeah, I earned a doctorate and I got a job. So getting that career coaching sounds like a pivotal point to you. And then getting some business input, right? Like I'm going to launch this business and it should be done a certain way so that I can have some success. So I like that you are sharing that with us because it is very important.
What it's also what reminds me of is none of this is reflexive behavior. It really means, again, the word strategy comes to mind, is, you have to be strategic. And, I followed my own logic and said, okay, 1 + 1 = 2, and then 2 + 2 = 4, so that I could move forward. I think I have good intuition, but I also I didn't want to waste time. And I know that there is some other knowledge that could benefit me, which is why I went to the Small Business Administration, where I talked to an accountant, an attorney, all of those things that really, to this day, are second nature to me. But it fortified me at the time, so know that I had some grounding. What I also had was as becoming a consultant again, moving into that space was an identity conflict, I would have to say, because I was so tied to my academic identity. And then people who I knew would say, oh, how are things at Boston University? And, thinking I was still there. For a while, I just fudged it and say, oh, all's fine. They weren't connected to that world of the academy. But it was a pressure point for me personally. And what that caused me to do in the midst of launching my consulting practice, I still had a private practice, by the way, that paid all the bills initially, was that I continued to behave as though I was in the academy. I published, I participated in professional psychology and counseling associations so that my identity would continue to be validated there and that I would have those contacts. I think that was a very good choice I made because I still have these connections over the years. What was important to come back to the consulting was when I talked to the people at the Small Business Administration, they told me it would take me about 7 years to realize that I had a successful business. If I was still around in 7 years, that it meant that that was the litmus test. And I found that a little depressing because I was ready to run. And yet you can't run. You know, it meant getting marketing done, getting, you know, collateral materials, et cetera, getting a team of people. So I have to tell you, by the time I did get to 7 years, I had a couple of my biggest clients. And it's kind of ironic that that was the point at which then I could say, wow, I've kind of arrived because I've got these big clients now. And then it all, you know, began to expand. One of the things that's important for me in thinking about working in the consulting space back then and now is how important the relationships are that you develop with a client organization. And I approach all of these relationships as though they're ones that I want to have to be long lasting. And even though the work ends, I would always say the work ends on a very positive note, that we have had a very profitable personal relationship, because you get close to the people you work with while you're doing this organizational change work.
Well, I think that's.
Go ahead.
Yes. So I think that is, again, we've started this conversation with relationships, right? People who have, they've seen us, and we're sort of now at the level of relationships with not just individuals, but organizations, because you have some pretty big clients. You are a big name out there. You know, you've been recognized by the American Psychological Associations as one of the founders of, you know, Latino mental health, now Latinx, right? And so I think that what I just reflected back on was this 7-year mark, right? And how when I was doing the math in my head, I thought, oh, wow, that's so interesting, because it seems like, you know, there are these 7-year cycles of things that occur. And if your business is still around in 7 years, well, that's great. But in the first part of it, you might have one relationship. That relationship might be with your attorney or your accountant or the person at the Small Business Association. And then ultimately that turns into a client, right? And then over time, you have more clients. And so I too remember maintaining my job in academia while I was building my private practice, and then went on to build my private practice and then build my coaching business. So these identity shifts, if you will, or even expansions, I think sometimes I've found that some people are sort of destroyed by it, because maybe their identity is so tied up in being an academician and being at the university or the institution. And then when they're told no, they're just devastated. They crumble. They really can't find their way back. And so during those times, would you agree that it's best to reach out to someone just to have a talk? Or, you know, I know we could be embarrassed or feel like failures, because sometimes academia doesn't throw you a ticker tape parade because you're Dr. Fill in the blank and you just got a grant or you just got a big publication. So would you say that reaching out to somebody would be helpful in those times?
It always is good to hear yourself talk to someone else. As clinicians, I remember talking to my clients and saying, okay, now you're going to talk out loud about what your confusion is, what your indecision is about. So now both of us are going to hear you talk about it. And you can you don't have to go to see a coach or clinician, but giving voice to whatever it is that's uncertain. You hear yourself giving voice to it. I think that's just so powerful. And it could be a friend, it could be somebody you trust. Again, I would always say, and an important question that you raise is, talk to someone who's not going to be judgmental.
Right.
That's the most important thing. Someone who will listen and not judge you. Mm-hmm. Because you're in I remember feeling in a precarious place. Do I leave the university? Do I go back to the university, when that showed up a little later? And, not just thinking about it and doing the cost benefit analysis on paper, listening to other people and their observations, people who knew me well and again would not be judgmental of me. And that continues to be a practice I use. Whether it's today, I talked with my marketing colleague who works with me in marketing and a potential new website developer. I have ideas, but I'm not going to say do it this way, because I'm not the content expert in those areas. I want to look good, and they're going to help me have the company look good. And so consulting with them when I want to make change, when I'm indecisive about something that's important to my career, but my business as well. So with career uncertainty, I always say, talk to someone.
That's great. So we would talk to someone, a trusted advisor, if you will, right? So it could be
absolutely
a colleague, a mentor, a coach, a sponsor, a champion. It could be someone in the institution or outside the institution. Mm-hmm. And so I'm wondering if, in addition to reaching out and doing a consult with someone or even mm-hmm. collaborating, are there any other resources that you think that would be beneficial for someone who's, maybe they're having some issues, but there are some people out there who aren't really facing any challenges, but either way, right? Mm-hmm. What would you think would be a couple, 2, 3 resources people should be thinking about in terms of career thriving, right? Mm-hmm. Career advancement?
That's a great question. I think about the amount of social media that's available today and the inspirational talks by other women. So I'm just talking about women. The inspirational talks about women who really encourage other women to thrive, whether it's Brené Brown or some of these other individuals who are, logical, great spokespeople about how to continue to think about yourself in the future and what you need to do to get there. Because candidly, this is a really important point. You don't want to have a crisis and say, uh-oh, now what? They're not going to give me tenure. Or they're, with COVID and all the higher education institutions shrinking, maybe someone's position is gone. And what it says to me, and I think this is probably something we should all consider is, have some checkpoints throughout your career to see, am I still happy doing what I'm doing? Does this still satisfy me? Am I still growing in this work? And if you can have a, kind of a brief inventory, 3 questions, and then if the answer to any one of them is no, then you have to do a little bit more examining. Okay, how can this be different? Or what do I need to do to feel like I am going to grow here? And so those basic questions, I do think on YouTube, there are a lot of great inspirational talks, and they don't have to be long.
Right.
By women who, are doing it or have, can talk about their own trajectories, that they've had some missteps. But what I have found, Dr. Hill, is a misstep is an opportunity, and not that I've misstepped, but a door closed, let's say.
Right. Yes.
So that's when, okay, the door closed, I was going in this direction. And so now I have to redirect myself so that I can continue to move in a direction that's going to be, what's the word I want to say? That's going to fulfill me. That's going to help me feel fulfilled. And so, move from consulting back to higher education, away from higher ed, back to consulting. I think the other part of my nonlinear path, just one more comment, is that I've moved a number of times.
Mm-hmm.
And I would say that helped.
Yes. And so you bring us full circle to the nonlinear path, in and out of academia, in and out of space and geography, in and out of institutions, in and out of identity, right? You and I are both psychologists, so we're very clear about identity and sometimes not so clear about identity, but doing that reassessment to make sure that you are on a path that is yours, right? So if it's, you need to do a course correction, if you find that you've gone off the path and you need to get back on, all of these things are sort of metaphors, I think, for life, right? And as we come to an end, this has been such a great talk, and I'm hopeful that I can have you back in the future because this is not enough time. How could we get in touch with you if someone wants to reach out for a consult, wants to connect with you, wants to follow you on social media? And of course, we'll have all of your links in the podcast so that you can easily access. But, what's your website?
Yep, it's the Arredondo Advisory Group. And it's arredondoadvisorygroup.com, one word. And it's a very bright red website. I'm also accessible through LinkedIn at Patricia Arredondo. And I have met many great contacts that way, people who again are interested in consulting, because to be honest with you, those of us who do consulting are pretty unique. Those of us who do coaching are pretty unique, because in our world, Dr. Hill, you and I have kind of created our spaces for doing this. So in many ways, we are also demonstrating the possibility of doing it on your own, or kind of creating your own industry or space in the industry. And I think for women of color, this is a terribly important message to send out.
I agree with you, Dr. Arredondo, and it has been an honor and privilege to know you and call you a friend and a sister. And I am looking at your backdrop at those lovely blooming bougainvilleas. in Mexico City. And
Right.
you had mentioned that they are coming towards the end of their bloom, but they look just stunning and magnificent, as you do as well. And so thank you again for being on the podcast today. Once again, this is Dr. Loren M. Hill, and you're listening to the Academic Career Coach podcast. And you can find me on LinkedIn as well as Dr. Loren M. Hill. You can also reach out to me on the website, which is 𝗍𝗶𝗶𝗍𝗶.com. Thank you again. If you like this podcast, please like and share and subscribe. And we look forward to seeing you during the next podcast.